Billionaire came home early and couldn't believe his eyes. Richard Blackwell was exhausted after another stifling day of endless meetings. The real estate tycoon had built an empire, but his personal life was a desert of loneliness he rarely admitted to himself. That's when he decided to come home 3 hours earlier than usual, something he hadn't done in years. When he opened the door to the master bedroom of his Beverly Hills mansion, he froze completely. His housekeeper, Margaret, was fast asleep in his king-sized bed, cradling 2 twin babies who were struggling to breathe. His first reaction was absolute fury. How dare she use his bed? But something about the woman's exhausted face, the deep circles under her eyes, and the protective way she held the children made him hesitate. The little ones had flushed skin and were sweating profusely. "Margaret," he called softly, trying to control his irritation. She startled awake, nearly dropping one of the babies. Her eyes instantly filled with tears. "Mr. Richard, I can explain," she stammered, scrambling to get up. "The air conditioning in my room broke last night, and they had such high fevers. I didn't know what else to do." "Who are these children?" he asked, noticing for the first time how their little faces were red with fever. "They're my grandchildren, sir. My Jessica's children. She left them with me and disappeared 2 weeks ago." Richard felt an inexplicable tightness in his chest. There was something about the vulnerability of those babies that struck him in a strange way. "Call Dr. Sullivan, my private physician. Right now," he ordered, surprising even himself. Margaret looked at him in disbelief. "But sir, I can't afford—" "I didn't ask about payment. Go get my phone from the office desk." As she hurried out, Richard studied the twins. One of them opened their dark little eyes and stared at him with an expression that brought back a painful memory from his past. It had been years since he'd thought about children, about family, about anything beyond business and profits. The doctor arrived in 15 minutes, unheard of for a house call. Dr. Sullivan examined the children carefully while Margaret answered his questions between sobs. "How old are they?" the doctor asked. 8 months, doctor. They were born premature." "And the mother, where is she?" Margaret lowered her eyes. She was only 17 when they were born. She couldn't handle the responsibility, left a note saying she wasn't cut out to be a mother." Richard watched silently, feeling a strange mix of compassion and anger. How could anyone abandon such tiny children? "They have pneumonia, but it's nothing serious if we treat it now," the doctor announced. "I'll prescribe antibiotics and some fever medication. They'll need constant care for the next few days." "Dr. Sullivan, I'll take care of everything," Richard said, ignoring Margaret's stunned expression. "Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us newcomers out. Now, back to the story. After the doctor left, Margaret tried to pick up the babies to take them back to her room. "Leave them here until they're better," Richard said. "I'll sleep in the guest room. But Mr. Richard, Mrs. Victoria is coming back from her trip tomorrow." The mention of his wife made him hesitate for a moment. Victoria was on yet another of her endless spa trips abroad, spending fortunes on cosmetic treatments while avoiding any real responsibility. "When she gets here, I'll explain the situation." That night, Richard barely slept. He heard Margaret getting up several times to check on the children, whispering words of affection he hadn't heard in his own home for decades. In the morning, he found her in the kitchen preparing bottles, her eyes red with exhaustion. "Mrs. Margaret, did you get any sleep?" "A little, doctor. They improved a lot overnight. The fever went down." Richard poured himself some coffee and for the first time in years had breakfast at home instead of rushing to the office. "Tell me about your daughter," he said suddenly. Margaret stopped stirring the bottle and sighed deeply. "Jessica has always been a difficult girl, doctor. She lost her father when she was 12 and never got over it. She started hanging around the wrong crowd, didn't want to study. When I found out she was pregnant, I thought she'd change, that having the babies would make her grow up. And it didn't happen. For a while, it seemed like it did. She cared for them with so much love, but she was just a child trying to raise other children. When they started crying more, becoming more demanding, she grew desperate. said she couldn't take it anymore, that she was suffocating. Richard listened in silence, thinking of his own troubled youth, the mistakes he'd made, the opportunities some had and others didn't. And now they're your responsibility? They're my grandchildren, Doctor. I have no one else in the world but them. My sister lives in the countryside and can barely support her own family. Just then, one of the babies began crying in the bedroom. Margaret rushed to tend to him, and Richard followed without thinking. He watched as she picked up the child with infinite care, whispering softly to soothe him. "What are their names?" "This is Ethan, and that one over there is Noah," she said, pointing to the other baby sleeping peacefully. "Ethan and Noah," Richard repeated, and for the first time in years, he smiled genuinely. The moment was interrupted by the sound of Victoria's car pulling into the garage. Richard felt his stomach tighten. His wife wasn't known for patience or compassion, especially when it came to staff. Victoria stormed into the house like a hurricane, barking orders at other employees about her luggage and shopping. Her footsteps echoed on the marble as she climbed the stairs, likely heading straight for the master bedroom. The scream that followed echoed through the mansion. "Richard! What the hell is going on here?" Richard climbed the stairs slowly, preparing for the battle he knew was coming. He found Victoria standing at the bedroom door, her face twisted in absolute disgust. "There are children in our bed, and it reeks of medicine in here." "Victoria, I can explain." "Explain what? That you let the maid turn our house into a nursery. Have you lost your mind?" Margaret appeared in the hallway, holding Ethan, who had started crying from the shouting. "Mrs. Victoria, I'm so sorry. It's just that the air conditioning in my room broke and they were sick. I don't care, you're fired, and get those children out of here right now." "She's not going anywhere," Richard said quietly but firmly. Victoria turned to him, wide-eyed. "Excuse me. You heard me. Margaret isn't being fired, and the children will stay here until they're fully better. You can't be serious. Since when do you defend the help? It's a matter of humanity, Victoria, something you seem to have lost on your travels." The argument that followed exposed cracks in their marriage that had existed for years but both had pretended to ignore. Victoria screamed about social status, about what the neighbors would think, about how she couldn't host her friends with children crying through the house. Richard, for the first time in decades, didn't back down. That afternoon, Margaret showed him the letter Jessica had left. The words came from a desperate young woman, admitting she couldn't be a mother, that she loved her children but didn't know how to care for them, that she'd rather leave them with their grandmother, who truly loved them. "She wrote that she'll come back when she's ready," said Margaret with tear-filled eyes. "But, Doctor, it's been 2 weeks and I haven't heard a thing. What if she doesn't return? Then I'll raise them alone, just like I raised her. I'll make it work." Richard admired the woman's determination. At 62, Margaret was willing to start over as a mother again. Over the following days, the mansion's routine changed completely. Richard began coming home earlier from work, always asking about the babies. Victoria locked herself in her room or went out to meet friends, making her displeasure clear. It was on the 5th day that the doctor found something concerning during a routine checkup. "Dr. Richard, I need to speak with you privately," said Dr. Sullivan after examining Noah. They stepped away into the office. "What is it?" "Noah has a heart murmur. It might be minor, but he needs further tests. Depending on the results, he may need surgery." Richard felt the world spin. What kind of surgery? It could range from a simple procedure to something more complex, but we should find out soon. When Richard told Margaret, she broke down in tears. "Doctor, I don't have money for expensive tests. My salary barely covers their basic needs." "Don't worry about the money," Richard said without hesitation. "We'll do whatever tests are necessary. But Doctor..." "No arguments, Margaret." That night, Richard called his personal accountant. "I need you to arrange a withdrawal for medical expenses, likely large sums." "Health problems of your own, Dr. Richard?" "No, it's for a personal matter." The next day, Noah underwent a series of tests at the best heart and vascular center in New York City. Richard accompanied Margaret, claiming he had meetings near the hospital. As they waited for results, he watched other parents awaiting news about their children, young couples crying in each other's arms, grandparents whispering prayers, entire families bound by worry. "Dr. Richard, Margaret said during the wait. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why are you helping so much? I've worked in your home for 5 years, but we've never talked like this." Richard took a moment to answer. "I don't know how to explain it. Maybe because it's been a long time since I had a real reason to do something good. You've always been a fair employer." "Being fair isn't the same as being good, Margaret. The test results confirmed Noah needed surgery. It wasn't an emergency, but it had to happen within the next 2 months. The cost was around $200,000. Margaret turned pale at the amount. "Doctor, I could sell my little house in Denver, but even then, it wouldn't be enough." "Margaret, stop worrying about money. Noah will have the best surgeon in the country." "But Dr. Richard, this is so much money, I'll never be able to pay you back." "Who said anything about paying me back?" She stared at him, confused. "Consider it an early Christmas gift," he said, trying to make it sound less dramatic than it was. When they got home, Victoria was waiting in the living room, furious. "Richard, we need to talk now." "Later, Victoria, I'm tired." "Now!" she shouted. "I got a call from the hospital authorizing a $200,000 surgery." "Have you lost your mind?" The argument that followed echoed through the house. Victoria accused Richard of being irrational, spending money on strangers while she had to ask for a new purse. "You know what, Victoria? I'm done. Tired of an empty life, of a marriage that was just for show, of a woman who only cared about appearances. How dare you speak to me like that? Because it's the truth. When was the last time you showed compassion for anyone? When was the last time we did anything together that wasn't a social obligation? That doesn't justify you spending a fortune on a maid's children. They're not just a maid's children. They're kids who need help." Victoria slammed the door and didn't come home that night. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. In the days that followed, Richard began noticing changes in himself he couldn't explain. He woke up anxious to know how the babies had slept. He came home with little gifts, special diapers, educational toys, tiny clothes. Margaret tried to refuse them, but he insisted. "Dr. Blackwell, you're doing far more than any employer would. Maybe because I don't feel like just your employer anymore." It was true. For the first time in years, Richard felt he was part of something bigger than business and profits. Watching Ethan's first smiles, listening to Noah babble sounds that almost seemed like words, seeing how they reacted when he came home, it all filled a void he hadn't even known existed. Victoria returned 3 days later with a proposal. "Richard, I spoke to my lawyer. I want a divorce. He was in the garden watching Margaret bathe the babies in the inflatable tub he'd bought. "Fine," he replied without looking away. "Just like that? Just fine? What did you expect? Drama?" "You're right, Victoria. We haven't been happy in years. I want half of everything. Talk to my lawyer, but there's one condition. Margaret and the children stay in the house." "That's ridiculous. It's non-negotiable." During the divorce proceedings, Richard discovered things about his wife that shocked him. Victoria had secret bank accounts, had invested money without consulting him, even owned an apartment in Miami he knew nothing about. "How did you hide all this?" he asked during one of the hearings. "Did you think I'd depend on you forever? I always knew this marriage would end someday." "Then why stay so long?" "Because it was convenient. For both of us." The coldness of her reply left him speechless. How many years of his life had he wasted in a loveless relationship? Meanwhile, Noah was preparing for surgery. The doctor had set the date and Richard insisted on going to the hospital with Margaret. "Dr. Blackwell, you don't have to come. I know you have important meetings. No meeting is more important than Noah." The statement surprised even him. When had he started caring so much? The night before the surgery, Richard found Margaret crying in the kitchen. "Margaret, what's wrong?" "I'm so scared, doctor. What if something goes wrong? I've already lost my daughter. I can't lose my grandson too." Richard sat beside her. "Nothing will go wrong. Noah is strong, and he has the best doctors." "But what if—" "Margaret, look at me. I promise I'll take care of you. No matter what happens, you'll always have a safe place." "Why, Dr. Blackwell? Why are you doing all this?" Richard thought about the question. Why, indeed? It had started as a simple act of kindness, but had become something much bigger. "Because you've given me something I lost a long time ago." "What, doctor?" "Purpose." The surgery lasted 5 hours. Richard and Margaret waited in the lobby like any family would. He held her hand when she cried, bought her coffee when she needed to calm down, prayed with her when she asked God to protect Noah. When the surgeon finally appeared with news, Richard felt his heart stop. The surgery was a complete success. Noah is fine and will recover perfectly. Margaret collapsed into tears of relief, and Richard felt his own eyes well up. When was the last time he'd been so emotional? During the recovery days at the hospital, Richard practically lived there. He cancelled meetings, rescheduled appointments, delegated important decisions. His secretary couldn't understand the change. "Dr. Richard, Mr. Thompson has been calling for 3 days about the proposal for the shopping mall in Denver." "Tell him the answer is no." "But doctor, it's a $50 million deal." "The answer is no." For the first time in his career, Richard was saying no to easy money, and for the first time it didn't bother him. On the 4th day of recovery, Ethan spiked a sudden high fever. The doctors suspected a hospital-acquired infection and started aggressive antibiotic treatment. Margaret panicked. "It can't be, Dr. Richard. Not both of them at the same time." Richard hugged her, trying to convey a strength he wasn't sure he had. "Ethan will be okay. We'll face this together." "Together?" "Yes, Margaret. Together." It was then that he realized those children weren't just Margaret's responsibility. They had become part of his life too. Ethan responded well to treatment, but the scare made Richard decide something that had been brewing in his mind for weeks. "Margaret, I need to talk to you about something." They were in the hospital garden, watching Noah play in his special post-surgery chair. "I want to adopt the boys." Margaret looked at him as if she hadn't understood. "What, doctor?" "I want to legally adopt them. They'd have my name, my protection, access to everything I can offer." "But, Dr. Richard, they already have a mother. Jessica could come back any time. And if she does, we'll talk. But until then, I want them to have complete security." Margaret was silent for a long time. "Are you sure about this? It's not just an impulse." Richard looked at Noah, who watched him with those intelligent eyes, and at Ethan sleeping peacefully in his arms. "I'm sure. For the first time in a long time, I'm absolutely certain about something." That night, Richard called his lawyer and began the adoption process. He knew it would be complicated, especially since the biological mother had simply disappeared. She hadn't formally relinquished her rights. "Dr. Richard," the lawyer said, "this could take months, maybe years, and there's a chance it could fail if the mother reappears and wants the children back. I understand the risks. I want to proceed anyway." When they returned home with Noah recovered, the mansion felt different. Victoria had taken most of her things, leaving only furniture and items she didn't consider important. Richard looked around and realized the house was emptier, but somehow fuller of life than it had been in years. "Margaret, I have a proposal for you." "Yes, doctor?" "How about we turn the guest room into a full-fledged children's room, with 2 beds, toys, everything they need?" "But doctor, there's no need to spend so much. It's necessary for me." In the following days, Richard threw himself into the project as if it were the most important deal of his life. He hired decorators, bought special furniture, had a baby monitoring system installed. When everything was ready, he called Margaret to see the result. "What do you think?" She walked into the room and began to cry. It was a perfect environment for children, with soft colors, safe furniture, and educational toys carefully arranged. "This is the most beautiful room I've ever seen, Dr. Richard." "Then it's settled. This will be Ethan and Noah's official room." That night, for the first time, the twins slept in their own beds, in their own room. Richard stood in the doorway for a few minutes watching them sleep and felt a peace he hadn't known in decades. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. 3 weeks later, when everything seemed to be settling into a happy routine, Jessica showed up at the mansion's door. Richard was in his office when he heard Margaret scream. He rushed to the entrance and found a thin young woman in dirty clothes with sunken eyes being embraced by her sobbing mother. "Jessica, my daughter, where have you been?" "Mom, I needed to think. I needed to see if I could live without them." Richard watched the scene in silence, feeling a mix of relief and fear. Relief because Margaret had her daughter back, fear of losing the children he'd learned to love. "And could you?" Margaret asked. Jessica shook her head, crying. "No, Mom, I couldn't. I miss them so much. But I also realized I don't know how to be a mother." "We learn, sweetheart. I learned with you." "Where are they?" Margaret hesitated and looked at Richard. "They're sleeping. But Jessica, a lot has changed while you were away." Richard stepped forward. "Good evening, Jessica. I'm Richard, your mother's employer." The young woman eyed him suspiciously. "You took care of my children?" "Your mother did. I just helped." "What kind of help?" Margaret quickly explained the pneumonia, Noah's surgery, the medical care, the new room. Jessica listened silently, her expression unreadable to Richard. "You did all this for them?" "We did what anyone would do," Richard replied. "No, sir, not anyone would. Most people would have fired my mum." "Then maybe I'm not like most people." Jessica asked to see the boys. Richard and Margaret took her to the nursery. When she saw Noah and Ethan sleeping in their new beds, in a perfect space made just for them, she broke down in tears. "They've grown so much, so healthy." "Noah had to have heart surgery," Margaret explained, "but he's perfectly fine now." "Surgery? How much did it cost?" "Don't worry about that," Richard said. "I need to worry. They're my kids." The statement brought a tense silence. Richard knew the difficult conversation had come. "Jessica, can we talk in the living room?" The three sat down. Richard explained the adoption process he'd started, clarifying it was only to give the boys legal security if she didn't return. "You want to keep my children? I want them to have the best life possible. And you think I can't give them that?" Richard chose his words carefully. "I think you're young, still learning to be a mother, and maybe you need help." "What kind of help?" "What if you went back to school?" Margaret suggested. "You dropped out in your sophomore year." "Mum, I have 2 kids to raise. I don't have time for school." "What if you did?" Richard asked. "What if there was a way for you to study, train for a career, while the boys are well cared for?" Jessica eyed him warily. "What are you proposing?" "That all 3 of you live here. You'd finish school, complete a vocational program, and gradually take on more responsibility for the boys. Your mother would keep helping, and I'd make sure you all have what you need." "Why would you do that?" Richard looked at Margaret, then at Jessica. "Because I've learned that having a real family is more important than any fortune." "And how would I fit into this family? As the mother of the children who have become my own in heart." Jessica stayed silent for a long time. "I need to think." "Of course. But in the meantime, stay here. Get to know your children again." In the days that followed, Richard watched Jessica interact with Noah and Ethan. She was affectionate but unsure. She asked Margaret about every detail, what they ate, when they slept, how to play with them. "They've changed so much," she said one afternoon, watching Noah crawl across the garden. "Children grow fast," Richard replied, who was beginning to understand the twins' little gestures and needs. "You really love them, don't you?" The question caught him off guard. "Yes, I do." "How is that possible? They're not even your children." "Jessica, love isn't about DNA. It's about choice, care, presence." "Did you ever have children?" Richard hesitated. It was a question no one had ever asked him directly. "No, my ex-wife and I, it was never a priority for us." "And now it is?" "Now it's the only priority that matters." That night, Jessica knocked on Richard's office door. "Can I talk to you?" "Of course, come in." "I've decided to accept your proposal." Richard felt his heart race. "Are you sure?" "I am, but with a few conditions." "Go on." "I want to be part of every decision about them. I want to learn how to be a real mother. And when I'm ready, when I have a career and can support my children, I want the option to leave here with them." "Understood. And if you decide to stay?" "Then we'll see." For now, I just want to learn how to be a mother." Richard extended his hand. "We have a deal." She shook it. "Thank you for taking care of them when I couldn't. Thank you for letting me be part of their lives." The months that followed were a time of adjustment for everyone. Jessica enrolled in a GED program and started a nursing program. Richard hired a private tutor to help her with the harder subjects. Margaret took on the role of full-time grandmother, teaching both Jessica and Richard about childcare. "Dr. Richard, you're holding Noah wrong," she'd say, smiling. "Not like that, support his little head." "I don't know how you can tell what they want when they cry," Richard complained. "You'll learn with time. Every cry is different." And indeed, with time, Richard learned. He learned that Ethan was more energetic in the morning and Noah in the afternoon. That one liked classical music to fall asleep, and the other preferred lullabies. That both smiled more when he came home from work. Jessica was learning too, but in her own way. She watched Richard with curiosity. "You've changed a lot since I got here," she said one day. "How so?" "When I first arrived, you always seemed tense, always worried. Now you seem lighter." Richard thought about the observation. It was true, there was a lightness in his life that hadn't been there before. "Maybe because now I have a reason to come home." "You didn't before?" "Before, I came home to escape work. Now I come home to find my family." The word family had become natural. Richard, Margaret, Jessica, Ethan, and Noah had formed a unit that worked better than any traditional family he'd known. Victoria's divorce was finalized without much drama. She kept the apartment in Miami, a significant sum of money and a few smaller properties. Richard kept the mansion and most of the businesses. "Are you sure you won't regret this?" she asked at the final hearing. "I'm sure. And you?" "No. We were never happy together, Richard. At least now we're honest about it." It was strange how the end of a 20-year marriage could be so simple when both parties recognized it had been a mistake from the start. With the divorce finalized, Richard devoted himself even more to his new family. He began working less, delegating more responsibilities to his partners. Dr. Blackwell. His secretary said one day, "You have a meeting with Japanese investors on Thursday. Cancel it. Thursday is the boy's first birthday." "But doctor, this meeting was scheduled 3 months ago." "Reschedule it for next week. My children's first birthday is more important." The birthday party was simple but full of meaning. Richard hired a photographer to capture every moment. Noah and Ethan, now walking and babbling words, were radiant with so many gifts and attention. "They won't even remember this," said Jessica, watching Richard patiently assemble a complicated toy. "But I will remember," he replied. "And so will you. And your mother. The memories we make today are for us." That night, after the children fell asleep, Richard, Margaret, and Jessica sat in the garden to talk. "Dr. Blackwell," Margaret said, "may I ask you a personal question?" "Of course." "Are you happy now?" Richard looked at the house, where 2 babies slept safely, where a young mother studied for a better future, where a devoted grandmother cared for everyone with endless love. "You know, Margaret, I spent my whole life thinking happiness was about achieving things, more money, more business, more properties. But I've learned that happiness is about caring for the people you love." "And are we those people?" Jessica asked. "You are my family, the only real family I've ever had." Months later, Jessica graduated from her nursing program with the highest grades in her class. Richard was in the audience at the graduation, holding Noah in his lap while Margaret held Ethan. "Look," he whispered to the babies, "your mommy is graduating." When Jessica received her diploma, she searched for Richard in the crowd and waved. He felt his eyes well up with pride. After the ceremony, Jessica approached him. "Thank you for making this possible. You did this on your own, I just provided the means." "No, Dr. Blackwell, you gave much more than that. You gave us a family." That night, Jessica made an announcement. "I received a job offer at a private hospital." Richard's stomach tightened. "Is it a good opportunity?" "It's excellent. Good salary, career growth, benefits. I can start next week." "And the boys?" I can hire a nanny. My salary allows for that now. Richard understood what she was saying. Jessica was ready to take full responsibility for her children. Do you want to leave here? That was always the plan, wasn't it? For me to become independent? It was. But... Richard stopped. He didn't know how to express that the thought of losing them terrified him. But I've learned to love them, all of you. Jessica looked at Margaret, who silently observed the conversation. Mom, what do you think? I think we've built a good family here, but the decision is yours, dear. What if I stayed? Jessica asked. What if instead of leaving, I contributed? I can pay part of the household expenses, help with everything. Richard's heart raced. Would you want that? I would. The boys are happy here. I'm happy here. And you've become the father they deserve. And you've become the daughter I never knew I wanted. And so, the family was permanently solidified. Richard officially adopted Ethan and Noah, with Jessica agreeing and participating in the entire process. She retained all rights as their biological mother, but Richard became their legal and heartfelt father. Margaret continued as the loving grandmother, but now with the official title of house supervisor. Jessica worked at the hospital during the day and took care of the children at night. Richard further reduced his workload to be present for the important moments. 2 years later, on a Sunday afternoon, Richard watched Ethan and Noah playing in the garden with Jessica. Margaret prepared a snack in the kitchen, humming an old song. His secretary called. Dr. Richard, I'm sorry to bother you on a Sunday, but we've received a buyout offer for the company, a very high amount. How much? She said the number, and Richard let out a low whistle. It was more money than he could spend in several lifetimes. What should I tell them? Richard looked back at the garden. Noah had fallen and was crying. Jessica comforted him while Ethan offered his toy to his brother. Margaret came out of the kitchen to check if everything was okay. Tell them I'm not interested, Richard replied. But doctor, it's a fortune. I already have a fortune. I have my family. When he hung up, Richard realized he had arrived at the place he'd always been searching for without knowing it. It wasn't a physical place, it was a state of mind. It was being where you are loved and where you can love without reservation. Noah ran to him with outstretched arms. Daddy! It was the first time one of the children had called him that. Richard scooped him up, feeling his heart might burst with joy. Yes, my son. Daddy's here. Always? Always. And for the first time in his life, Richard made a promise he knew he could keep. Years passed. Ethan and Noah grew up in a home full of love, with a devoted mother, a wise grandmother, and a father who had learned that true wealth isn't measured in money. Jessica married a co-worker who loved the children as if they were his own. Margaret became the respected matriarch of the family. Richard discovered that being a grandfather was even better than being a father, and when people asked how that unconventional family had come to be, Richard always answered, with a little courage to change and a lot of love to share. On a Sunday afternoon, Richard was in the garden with Ethan and Noah's children. A new generation was growing up in that house, which had been transformed by love. Margaret, now with completely white hair but still bright-eyed, approached him. Dr. Richard, do you regret anything? Richard looked around. The mansion had been renovated several times to accommodate the growing family. Where there had once been empty, silent halls, there were now toys scattered about, family photos on the walls, and the constant sound of laughter. What could I possibly regret, Margaret? Changing your entire life for babies who weren't yours. Richard smiled. I didn't change my life for them. They gave me a life. How so? Before them, I merely existed. After them, I began to live. Margaret nodded in understanding. And now? Now I know the best decision I ever made was opening my home and my heart to all of you. That evening, the whole family gathered for their weekly dinner. Jessica and her husband, Ethan and Noah with their wives and children, Margaret presiding over the table with her usual wisdom, and Richard watching it all with endless gratitude. Shall we say a prayer of thanks? Margaret suggested. Everyone joined hands around the large table. Richard looked at each face, each smile, each person who had become part of his life on that fateful day years ago. "Thank you," he said softly, "for teaching me that family isn't about blood. It's about choice, love, and presence." "Thank you, Dad," said Noah, "for choosing us." "Thank you, Grandpa." The grandchildren chimed in unison. "Thank you," said Jessica, "for teaching me it's never too late to start over." "Thank you," said Margaret, "for proving that miracles happen when we open our hearts." Richard closed his eyes and felt complete peace. He had started as a successful but lonely businessman. He had become a father, a grandfather, the patriarch of a family united by love. And it had all begun that day when he came home early and found 2 children sleeping in his bed, changing his life forever. The end. Tell us in the comments which part of the story moved you the most. Do you believe Richard made the right decision? Share your thoughts, and if you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming tales.